Elena's phone buzzed on her bedside table, the light illuminating the dark room. She squinted at the screen, barely able to focus on the message from Jake. "We need to talk," it read. Elena's heart skipped a beat, a cold rush sweeping through her chest. What could it mean? The silence had been stretching for weeks now, with no word from him. He had always been distant, but this felt different. Her hands trembled as she picked up the phone, the weight of those few words settling deep into her bones. Was this it? Was the long-distance love they shared finally unraveling? Elena couldn't pull her eyes away from the phone. The words, "We need to talk," echoed in her mind, louder than anything else. Her thoughts raced in every direction, each one colder than the last. Was Jake going to break up with her? Did he meet someone else? The uncertainty gnawed at her, pushing her to the edge. She tried to reach out to him earlier this week, but his responses had been lukewarm, distant. She thought maybe it was just the distance, the pressure of his busy life pulling him away. But now, with this message, every fear she'd buried deep inside her was coming to the surface. She felt a pit forming in her stomach, and with a deep breath, she pressed a finger to the screen. She didn't know what to expect, but she was terrified of what she might find. Elena's mind started to replay every moment of their relationship. The early days when they couldn't get enough of each other, the long video calls, the way his voice would soothe her even across time zones. They had shared so much, or so she thought. But as time went on, something changed. Jake's texts had become less frequent, his responses shorter. She had brushed it off, convinced that it was just the pressures of life getting to him. Yet now, with the message in her hands, she felt the reality crashing in. She had been living in denial, holding on to the love they once shared, while slowly losing touch with the person he had become. The tears that had been building up all night finally spilled over, tracing the curve of her cheek. She didn't know how to fix this, if it could even be fixed. She just wanted to hear his voice, to understand why he had pulled away. As the tears fell, Elena tried to breathe, to steady herself. She knew she couldn't fall apart completely, not yet. She had to understand what was happening, what Jake was trying to say with those 3 words. But as the minutes passed, she realized that she was running out of time. She had to make a decision. Should she call him? Should she wait for him to respond? Or would that just make the silence grow even louder? She had never felt so alone in this relationship before. She had always thought that love could bridge any gap, could make the distance feel smaller. But now, that love felt like a distant memory. She opened her messaging app, her finger hovering over his contact. She knew the moment she hit send, everything would change. With a final shaky breath, Elena pressed the call button. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, as if it was trying to escape. The phone rang once, twice, and then a voice came through, calm, distant. "Elena." It was Jake. But it wasn't the warm tone she was used to. There was something different in his voice, something she couldn't place. Hesitation, maybe, or just exhaustion. She could feel it in her bones. The space between them was widening, and she wasn't sure if they could ever close it. Her throat tightened as she tried to speak, but the words felt too heavy. "Jake, what's going on?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She had waited so long for this moment, but now that it was here, it felt like everything was slipping through her fingers. Elena sat in the quiet of her apartment, clutching the phone that still felt like an anchor pulling her deeper into confusion. She couldn't stop thinking about the early days with Jake, how everything felt perfect, as if the universe had aligned just for them. Their first meeting had been serendipitous. She remembered the warmth of the cafe, the way Jake had smiled at her like she was the only person in the room. They'd stayed up talking for hours, sharing secrets and dreams. He had a way of making her feel seen, heard, like no one else ever had. That was the magic of their connection. Yet it was all beginning to slip away. The memories she held so dearly now seemed like fragile glass, ready to shatter. She had sacrificed so much for their love, nights spent staying up late on video calls, early mornings with only a few fleeting hours of sleep. And yet now, With the silence between them growing louder, she couldn't help but wonder if it had all been enough. If the love they had shared had truly been real, or if it had simply been a moment in time, something fleeting that she couldn't hold on to. As the days dragged on, Elena tried to fill the silence with distractions, work, errands, the occasional chat with friends, but nothing seemed to work. Her mind kept drifting back to Jake. She could still hear his voice, smooth and comforting, as he had whispered to her during their late-night conversations. "I'm here, Elena. No matter the distance, I'm here with you," he had promised. Those words echoed in her mind now, but they felt hollow, as though he had never truly believed them himself. She wondered if he had meant them when he said them, or if he had been simply trying to reassure her, to soothe her fears. The distance between them had always been there, lurking just beneath the surface, but now it felt like a vast ocean, a gulf that was impossible to cross. She couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, something irreversible. It was as though the promise of love they had built together was crumbling under the weight of time zones and distance. Jake had been distant for weeks now. It wasn't just the lack of communication, though that was part of it. It was his absence. Elena couldn't explain it, but she felt like he wasn't truly present with her anymore, even when they spoke. Their conversations, once lively and full of warmth, had become strained, filled with awkward silences and rushed goodbyes. She began to question everything, their relationship, her trust in him, and the love that had once felt so certain. The doubts started to creep in, tiny little cracks forming in the foundation she had built her life around. She wasn't sure when it had started, but it was becoming harder to ignore. Was it her fault? Had she done something wrong? Had she been too clingy, too needy? The questions flooded her mind, relentless, each one sinking deeper into her chest, making it harder to breathe. She tried to push them away, but they kept resurfacing, gnawing at her, making her second-guess every moment they had shared. Elena's thoughts wandered back to the time they had spent together, to the way Jake's eyes had always softened when he looked at her. She missed that warmth, that tenderness. The memory felt like a ghost, something she could almost touch, but could never hold on to. She wondered if Jake even remembered those moments anymore. She wanted to believe that he did, but the growing silence was impossible to ignore. She had tried reaching out to him, sending texts and leaving voicemails, but each attempt only deepened the emptiness. She hadn't received a response, not even an acknowledgement of her efforts. It was as if he had disappeared from her life entirely, and she was left behind, suspended in a world where nothing made sense. Elena had been patient, had been understanding, but now the loneliness was suffocating. She had to know the truth. She had to know if the man she had loved for so long was still the same person she remembered. As days turned into weeks, Elena found herself questioning the nature of love. Was it really enough to bridge such vast distances, to survive the silence that now filled her life? She had believed that love could withstand anything, time, space, even the miles that stretched between them. But now, with each unanswered message, and each empty promise, she was starting to wonder if love alone was enough. Was it enough to hold on when one person wasn't holding on with you? The loneliness was becoming unbearable. She could feel herself unraveling, piece by piece, like a sweater that had been pulled too many times. She had given so much of herself, but in the end, was it worth it? She didn't know anymore. She had been patient, but now patience was turning into a slow, aching desperation. She had to know. She had to understand what had happened to the love they once shared. The silence between Elena and Jake had stretched for weeks now. Every time Elena reached out, there was no response. Calls went straight to voicemail, and texts were left unread. She had become used to this slow, aching silence, but tonight, as she stared at her phone once again, a sharp pang of frustration coursed through her. She had sent another message that afternoon. An earnest one, asking if everything was okay. She told herself she wouldn't overthink it. But each unanswered message, each missed call, only served to deepen the chasm between them. The distance felt like a betrayal, and her heart struggled to hold on to hope. Elena paced around her small living room, her thoughts a whirlwind. The growing silence was suffocating, and it was hard to ignore the gnawing feeling that Jake was pulling away. She had tried to convince herself that everything was fine, that life just got busy, that he had other things on his plate. But deep down, Elena knew that if the situation had been reversed, she would have made time for him. The doubt that had settled in her chest began to blossom into something darker. Was there someone else? Was that why Jake was so distant? Elena was afraid to ask, afraid of what the answer might be. But she couldn't live with the fear anymore. She had to know the truth. That evening, Elena decided to confront the fear head-on. She picked up her phone, her hands shaking as she dialed Jake's number. The phone rang for what felt like an eternity before going to voicemail. Elena took a deep breath and left a message, her voice trembling slightly as she spoke. "Jake, I need to know what's going on. You've been distant, and it's killing me. I can't keep doing this. Waiting, wondering. I deserve more than this silence." She ended the call, but the moment she hung up, she knew that things could never be the same again. Whether he answered or not, something had shifted between them, and the fear of losing him was now a constant weight on her chest. The next day, Elena sat at her desk, waiting for Jake's response. She had barely slept the night before, her mind racing with possibilities. The message she had left was a mixture of hope and fear, but there was no reply. Her phone lay next to her, buzzing occasionally with other notifications, but none of them were from him. As the day wore on, Elena's frustration deepened. She had poured everything into this relationship, sacrificed her own needs for the sake of their love, but now she was starting to feel invisible. Why was she always the one reaching out? Why did she have to fight for his attention when it should have been a mutual effort? The silence felt like a constant reminder of how little control she had over her own heart. Elena had had enough. The uncertainty, the endless waiting, the silence, it was all becoming too much. That night, she sat on the couch, staring at her phone, a decision slowly building inside her. She couldn't keep living like this, always wondering where he was or what he was doing. She had to take control. She typed out a message, her fingers hesitating over the screen for a moment before she hit send. "I can't do this anymore, Jake. I need to know where we stand. If you don't feel the same way anymore, please just tell me." She hit send, her heart pounding as she set the phone down. For the first time in weeks, Elena felt a sense of relief. She had finally spoken her truth. Elena's phone buzzed the following morning, the familiar vibration echoing in the quiet of her apartment. For a moment her heart skipped, thinking it was Jake finally reaching out. But when she picked up her phone, it wasn't his name that appeared on the screen. It was a text from an unknown number. "I'm sorry to do this over text, but you need to know the truth. Jake has been seeing someone else. He's not coming back." The words seemed to blur together, the shock setting in slowly. Her hands shook as she reread the message, but it didn't change. It was real. Jake, the man she had loved, had moved on, and Elena was the last to know. Her world felt like it was crumbling. Elena couldn't sit still. She paced around the apartment, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. She hadn't been prepared for this. She hadn't expected to hear that Jake had been seeing someone else. The betrayal stung deeply, but there was also a sense of relief. Now at least, she knew the truth. She had spent weeks agonizing over unanswered messages, wondering why Jake had pulled away. But to find out that he was already with someone else, that was the knife in her chest. She had invested so much into the relationship, sacrificed so much of herself, and now it felt like everything had been a lie. The love she had held on to was nothing more than an illusion. Later that evening, Elena found herself staring at her phone again, willing Jake to call to explain himself. But the silence was deafening. She had thought the worst had passed, but now the reality was sinking in. Jake had been living a double life. As she sat on the couch, the weight of it all felt suffocating. She had been left in the dark, her loyalty to him twisted into something humiliating. Her fingers hovered over her phone as if by some miracle he might message her. But deep down, Elena knew it wasn't going to happen. Jake had moved on. And now, It was time for her to let go. The next day, Elena decided to confront Jake. She couldn't keep letting the silence speak for him. With shaky hands, she dialed his number, her heart pounding in her chest. When the voicemail picked up, Elena hesitated for a moment, then began speaking. "Jake, I don't know what you think is happening here, but I deserve the truth. If you've moved on, just tell me. I can't keep doing this. I can't keep waiting for someone who's not here." She ended the call, feeling a strange mixture of dread and relief. For the first time in a long while, Elena wasn't waiting. She had made the decision to confront the truth, no matter how painful. Elena sat back down on her couch, the phone now silent in her hand. She had said everything she needed to say, but the silence in her apartment felt suffocating. She had confronted Jake, but now, with nothing but the echo of her own words, she wondered if she would ever get the closure she so desperately needed. The next few hours felt like an eternity. She stared at her phone, but no new messages came. No call. No explanation. The truth had been revealed, but it still left her with a hollow ache. The realization that Jake was no longer part of her world settled in, and for the first time, Elena realized that she had to start rebuilding her life without him. Elena couldn't keep the tears back anymore. After everything, Jake's silence, the betrayal, the unanswered questions, she finally confronted him, voice trembling. "Why didn't you tell me?" she demanded. "I deserved the truth, not this endless waiting." Her heart ached, but the anger bubbled up, raw and uncontrollable. She had loved him, and he had taken that love for granted. Her voice cracked. "I gave everything, Jake. And you gave nothing." His silence only deepened the wound. When Jake finally responded, his words were empty. "I didn't know how to say it," he muttered. "I'm sorry." But the apology felt hollow. Elena stared at her phone, crushed. This wasn't the apology she had imagined. "Sorry," she whispered. It wasn't enough. The truth hurt, but the lies had done more damage. He didn't understand her, didn't understand what she had sacrificed. And now, there was nothing left to say. The love she once fought for was gone. Her phone vibrated again, but this time, Elena didn't check it. She wasn't waiting anymore. The anger, the sadness, the exhaustion, it all culminated in a final heartbreaking realization. She had loved someone who wasn't capable of giving her the love she deserved. With a deep breath, Elena stood up, her decision clear. She couldn't keep clinging to someone who had already let go. For the first time in weeks, Elena felt the weight of the silence lift. She didn't need Jake's approval or his love. She had her own. It wasn't easy, but she knew it was the only way forward. As she left the apartment for a walk, the cool air felt refreshing. She wasn't running away, she was running toward herself. The first step to healing had begun. As Elena walked through the city, she realized she was no longer a part of the world she once shared with Jake. She had finally released the person who had kept her trapped in a false love. And though her heart was heavy, there was an undeniable sense of peace. For the first time she felt like she could breathe. It had been weeks since Elena had confronted Jake, and with each passing day, she felt a growing sense of peace. The ache that once consumed her heart was starting to fade. She focused on herself, on rebuilding her life, even if it was difficult at times. Her friends had been supportive, reminding her that she deserved someone who could match her energy, someone who would meet her halfway. As she walked through the park one afternoon, she realized she was finally starting to feel whole again, without him. Elena had started taking up new hobbies, painting, cooking, and even yoga. She discovered parts of herself she had long ignored. One evening she painted the sunset, the colors mixing into a beautiful swirl of pinks and oranges. As she added the final strokes, she realized that the sunset had become a metaphor for her life. The darkness had passed, and the light was now breaking through. She wasn't defined by the past anymore. She had moved forward, and it felt right. One day, Elena received a text from Mia, inviting her to dinner. It had been a while since she had seen her best friend, and Elena realized how much she had missed their time together. At dinner they talked about everything, Elena's journey, her growth, and the challenges she had overcome. She spoke with a new sense of empowerment, her voice steady and clear. As she laughed at a joke Mia made, Elena realized that she had truly healed. She was no longer the person she was before. She had found her strength. A few weeks later, Elena took a solo trip to the beach. The sand beneath her feet felt grounding, the sound of the waves soothing. As she walked along the shore, she thought about everything she had endured and how far she had come. She wasn't looking for love anymore. She was content with herself. She had rediscovered her independence and her joy. Elena realized that sometimes the hardest part wasn't letting go of someone else. It was letting go of the version of herself that had clung to that person. Back in the city, Elena felt ready to start a new chapter. Her life was no longer defined by the absence of Jake, and she realized that her story was far from over. She had learned that healing wasn't a linear process. It took time, patience, and self-love. Elena started seeing a therapist, where she could finally express everything she had kept bottled up. The pain was still there, but it no longer controlled her. She had reclaimed her life, and that, in itself, was a victory. As she stood in front of a mirror one morning, she smiled at the woman staring back at her. Strong, independent, and whole. Months had passed since Elena let Jake go. She had built a new life for herself, and for the first time in a long while, it felt right. But one night, as she sat in her apartment, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Jake. The text was simple. "I miss you. Can we talk?" Elena stared at the screen, her heart racing. She had thought she was over him, thought she had moved on. But now, seeing his name again stirred old feelings, confusion, longing, and the ache of the past. For a moment, she felt the pull to respond, to go back to what was familiar, but she paused. Hadn't she already moved forward? Elena put the phone down and stood up, pacing across the room. Her mind was clouded with thoughts of Jake, of the past they shared, and the painful breakup. She had come so far, yet here she was, teetering on the edge of everything she had fought to leave behind. The memories of their time together, the sweet words and promises, seemed to tug at her heart. But she reminded herself of the reasons she had moved on, how she had finally found peace and strength. She wasn't the same person she had been when she was with him. She had to remember that. After what felt like an eternity, Elena sat back down on the couch. She took a deep breath, picking up her phone again. She could feel the weight of the decision before her, whether to respond or not. Her thumb hovered over the screen. She thought about Jake, about the love they once had, but then she thought about herself, about how far she had come. The truth was, she didn't need him anymore. She had already learned how to be whole on her own. With one final breath, Elena made her choice. She deleted the message without responding, feeling a strange sense of release. The decision wasn't easy, but Elena knew it was the right one. That night, she went to bed feeling a quiet strength she hadn't felt in years. She had finally let go of the ghost of Jake, and with that release, she made room for something new, something that had nothing to do with the past. Elena was no longer waiting for anyone to validate her worth. She was enough, just as she was. As she drifted off to sleep, she realized that her heart, though scarred, was whole again. The following day, Elena stepped out into the city, the sunlight warming her skin. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to face it. She wasn't waiting for Jake anymore, or for anyone else. She was walking forward, alone but stronger than ever. As she walked down the street, the sound of the city felt different, livelier, more vibrant. Elena had come a long way, and she was finally free.